Part 1. The Ghost Blimp L-8, the airship that returned without its crew. On the morning of August 16, 1942, an American military airship drifted silently toward the California coast. It wasn't under anyone's control. Its engines were still running. Its radio was operational. Emergency equipment remained on board. Yet the 2 U.S. Navy officers assigned to fly it had vanished without leaving a single confirmed clue. The aircraft landed almost by itself in the streets of Daly City, just south of San Francisco. More than 80 years later, historians still ask the same unsettling question: how can 2 trained servicemen disappear from an aircraft that never crashed? To understand why the mystery became known as the Ghost Blimp, we have to return to one of the most uncertain periods in American history. It was the summer of 1942. Only 8 months had passed since the attack on Pearl Harbor. The United States had entered World War II and fear had reached the Pacific coast. Japanese submarines had already attacked merchant ships and shelled coastal installations near California. Military commanders worried that enemy submarines could be operating only a few miles offshore. Protecting the coastline became a daily priority. One unexpected weapon played a crucial role. Unlike airplanes, Navy blimps could remain in the air for many hours while flying slowly enough to detect submarines lurking beneath the ocean's surface. Their crews scanned the sea through binoculars, watched for oil slicks, and reported anything unusual to nearby naval forces. One of those patrol aircraft was L-8, a U.S. Navy L-class blimp assigned to Naval Air Station Moffett Field south of San Francisco. Compared with the enormous German Zeppelins of previous decades, L-8 was relatively small. It measured approximately 152 feet in length and carried a crew of 2. Powered by 2 Warner radial engines, the airship could patrol quietly for hours while searching vast areas of the Pacific. On Sunday morning, August 16th, Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody, age 38, and Ensign Charles Ellis Adams, age 27, prepared for what should have been another routine anti-submarine patrol. Both men were experienced naval aviators. Neither had any known disciplinary problems. Their aircraft had recently passed inspection. Weather reports described coastal conditions as generally favorable, with patches of morning fog common for the San Francisco Bay Area. Nothing suggested the mission would become one of aviation's greatest mysteries. At approximately 6:03 a.m., L-8 lifted off from Moffett Field. Ground crews watched the blimp climb steadily before turning west toward the Pacific Ocean. Its assignment was straightforward: patrol the waters west of the Golden Gate, search for enemy submarines, and return later that morning. The flight began exactly as expected. For nearly an hour, radio communications remained routine. The crew reported their position and continued following their assigned patrol route. Then, just before 8 o'clock, something unusual happened. Lieutenant Cody radioed headquarters. The crew had spotted what appeared to be an oil slick several miles off the coast near the Farallon Islands. During wartime, an oil slick could mean many things. It might indicate a leaking vessel, it might mark the location of a damaged submarine, or it could simply be natural seepage from the ocean floor. The crew requested permission to investigate more closely. Permission was granted immediately. Ground controllers expected another routine report within minutes. Instead, the radio fell silent. At first, nobody worried. Temporary communication failures were common. Radio reception over the Pacific could become unreliable because of weather and atmospheric conditions. But as the minutes passed, operators at Moffett Field attempted repeatedly to contact L-8. There was no reply. Meanwhile, people along the California coastline began noticing something strange. Fishermen reported seeing the blimp flying unusually low over the water. Several witnesses later recalled that it appeared to circle the same area more than once. Some believed the crew was inspecting something below. Others thought the aircraft seemed to be drifting. Their accounts differed in small details, but they agreed on one point: something about the airship's behavior looked unusual. Then everything changed. Around 10:30 a.m., residents near San Francisco noticed L-8 approaching the shoreline. It was flying much lower than expected. Witnesses watched as the blimp crossed over the city without following any obvious course. Instead of maintaining altitude, it slowly descended toward the suburbs south of San Francisco. At first, many assumed it was making an emergency landing. Others believed it had simply become caught in shifting coastal winds. No one imagined the truth waiting inside. The airship struck electrical wires before bouncing across rooftops in Daly City. Its landing gear caught on a house. One of the suspension cables wrapped around a utility pole. The impact caused part of the blimp to lose lift. Gradually, the giant aircraft settled onto nearby streets. Local residents rushed toward the scene. Police officers arrived within minutes. Navy personnel followed soon afterward. Everyone expected to rescue an injured crew. Instead, they discovered one of the most baffling scenes in military aviation history. The control cabin was empty. Lieutenant Ernest Cody was gone. Ensign Charles Adams was gone. There were no bodies, no blood, no obvious signs of violence. The engines continued running. The ignition switches remained on. The radio was still capable of transmitting. Several items normally carried by the crew remained exactly where they should have been. Life jackets were on board. Parachutes had not been used. Personal equipment remained inside. Nothing suggested that both officers had intentionally abandoned the aircraft. Even more puzzling, there was no evidence that anyone else had entered the gondola. The blimp itself showed surprisingly little damage beyond what had occurred during its uncontrolled landing. Investigators immediately began asking the question that still echoes today. If neither man had parachuted, if neither had landed the aircraft, if there had been no crash over the ocean, how had both crew members disappeared? Within hours, the U.S. Navy launched a massive search. Aircraft scanned the Pacific. Patrol boats searched the coastline. The Coast Guard joined the operation. Nearby vessels were questioned. No confirmed trace of either officer was ever found. Not a life jacket, not a body, not a piece of uniform, nothing. As the search expanded, investigators returned to one crucial detail that many people overlooked: the final radio transmission about the mysterious oil slick. Was it merely a coincidence, or had Lieutenant Cody and Ensign Adams discovered something that somehow led to their disappearance? At the time, no one could answer that question. But investigators were about to uncover a series of small details that made the mystery even more difficult to explain. Part 2. The Ghost Blimp L-8, the airship that returned without its crew. Investigators first focused on a simple question. Could the crew have accidentally fallen overboard? The gondola was carefully examined after the blimp had been secured. Nothing suggested a violent struggle. The flight controls showed no obvious malfunction. The radio equipment functioned normally. The engines were capable of operating. The fuel supply was sufficient. Even more surprising, the emergency parachutes remained inside the aircraft. If the crew had intentionally abandoned the blimp, why would they leave behind equipment that might save their lives? The inspection also revealed another important detail. One of the life rafts appeared to have been deployed or was no longer secured in its normal position. Historians disagree about exactly when this occurred, whether it happened before the crew disappeared or during the blimp's uncontrolled descent over land. That uncertainty has fueled decades of debate. The Navy immediately reconstructed the timeline. After reporting the oil slick, L-8 never transmitted another confirmed radio message. Yet the aircraft continued flying for hours. That suggested something unexpected had happened shortly after the crew began investigating the object below. One possibility quickly emerged. Perhaps one officer leaned over the side of the gondola while examining the ocean. If he slipped, the second officer might have instinctively tried to save him. In a small patrol blimp, leaving the controls, even for a few seconds, could be disastrous. If both men went overboard within moments of each other, the now unmanned blimp would have continued flying until changes in ballast and engine settings caused it to descend. It sounded plausible, but investigators soon encountered problems with that explanation. Experienced Navy airmen were trained never to leave the aircraft unsecured over open water. Both men wore safety harnesses during many phases of flight. No damaged harnesses were found. No broken attachment points were reported, and if one officer had fallen, why wasn't there any distress call? One overlooked fact continued to trouble investigators. The radio remained functional. Earlier that morning, Cody had contacted Moffett Field without difficulty. If either man had enough time to attempt a rescue, why didn't one of them press the microphone and report an emergency? That silence remains one of the strongest arguments against many popular theories. As news spread across California, newspapers quickly seized upon the story. Headlines described a military aircraft landing by itself. Photographs showed the enormous gray blimp tangled among houses and power lines while curious residents gathered below. Almost overnight, L-8 became known as the Ghost Blimp. Public imagination filled the gaps left by missing evidence. Some speculated about enemy submarines. Others wondered whether a hidden explosion had thrown the crew into the sea. Still others suggested secret wartime operations that were never disclosed. But official investigators found no evidence supporting sabotage or enemy action. There were no bullet holes, no signs of explosives, no indication that another aircraft had attacked the blimp. The wartime atmosphere, however, made such theories difficult to dismiss in the public mind. The FBI was informed because of the wartime context, but the primary investigation remained in the hands of the U.S. Navy. Investigators interviewed fishermen, Coast Guard crews, civilian witnesses, and military personnel who had observed portions of the flight. Many accounts agreed on one detail. Before reaching land, L-8 appeared to climb and descend gradually rather than plunge uncontrollably. That behavior suggested the blimp had remained structurally sound. It simply had no one left aboard to control it. Then another question emerged. Could the oil slick itself explain everything? Natural oil seeps are common along parts of the California coast. During World War II, however, any slick demanded attention because damaged submarines often released fuel or oil. Investigators considered whether Cody and Adams might have descended to inspect the water more closely. If one officer attempted to observe the slick through an open hatch while the other maneuvered the blimp, an unexpected shift in balance or a sudden gust of wind could have created a fatal chain of events. No evidence proved this happened. But neither could investigators rule it out. As weeks passed, search crews continued scanning the Pacific. Ships revisited the patrol area, aircraft flew additional search patterns, ocean currents were studied in an attempt to estimate where two men might have entered the water. Nothing was recovered, not a helmet, not a life jacket, not a fragment of clothing. The Pacific kept its secret. Years later, historians revisiting the case reached a frustrating conclusion. Almost every theory depends on one event that no witness actually saw. No one observed the crew disappear. No one recorded their final minutes. Everything after the last radio transmission must be reconstructed from physical evidence and probability. That is why the mystery has endured for more than 8 decades. The official U.S. Navy investigation ultimately concluded that the exact cause of the disappearance could not be determined. Among the possible explanations, an accidental fall during low-altitude operations over the ocean was considered the most likely. Yet even that conclusion acknowledged significant unanswered questions. Why did both officers disappear? Why was there no emergency call? Why did the aircraft remain airborne for so long afterward? Alternative theories have continued to circulate ever since. Some writers have suggested mechanical problems forced the crew outside the gondola. Others propose they were attempting to release or recover equipment. A few have argued that the men may have become entangled while trying to inspect the airship. None of these ideas has been supported by conclusive evidence. And despite decades of speculation, there is no credible historical evidence that enemy forces, espionage, or paranormal events played any role. Sometimes the simplest explanation is also the hardest to prove. Today, aviation historians generally agree on one point. The mystery survives not because of extraordinary evidence, but because of missing evidence. Every known fact fits together, until the moment the crew vanished. After that, the historical record falls silent. The image remains unforgettable. A military patrol airship floating above California on a quiet Sunday morning, its engines humming, its controls untouched, its mission unfinished, and its crew gone forever. World War II is remembered for massive battles, famous commanders, and technological breakthroughs. Yet hidden within that history are quieter mysteries, events that never made headlines for long but continue to puzzle investigators decades later. The Ghost Blimp L-8 is one of them, not because it points to the supernatural, not because it proves a conspiracy, but because it reminds us how easily certainty can disappear when the final pieces of evidence are carried away by the sea. Somewhere between the Pacific Ocean and the California coastline, Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody and Ensign Charles Ellis Adams vanished without a single confirmed answer, and history has never been able to tell us what happened during the last moments of their flight.